Hi. In this short lecture, we're going to talk about destructive and constructive sides of interpersonal conflict. So, we know that conflict is unavoidable, but the outcomes, how a conflict ends, right, those outcomes differ. We might feel better after a conflict, we might feel worse, we might feel closer to someone, we might feel more distant. So, feeling outcomes can be dependent on the way that you manage the conflict. So, in other words, how you go about fighting influences the outcome, right? Your style of fighting influences the result. Now, one type of conflict that is especially pernicious is bullying. And bullying is a form of conflict in which the abuse is persistent, so it goes on for a long period of time, and the person being bullied finds it very difficult to defend themselves. Now, we know that because of studies that 15% of any given population in a school or workplace has been bullied. So it's not just at school, by the way. People report feeling bullied at work. We know that over half of all adolescents in the U.S. say that they've been bullied online. They've experiencing some sort of online bullying. Now, the consequences of bullying can be really severe. So we talked about the outcomes of conflict, and the outcomes of bullying type conflict can be really, really bad. We know that people who get bullied are more likely to express sadness, depression, think about killing themselves, and actually kill themselves, right? So the tendencies or the kind of outcomes that tend to occur when people are bullied, especially for longer periods of time, are really negative. Now, there are some communication behaviors or types of communication that are characteristic of bullying, that go hand in hand with bullying. We know that isolating people is a bullying behavior, making them feel like they're not part of the group. Ignoring people, that goes hand in hand with isolation. Nitpicking, so just criticizing every little thing about a person, and then of course excessively criticizing, picking on someone, just criticizing them all the time, right? These are all forms of bullying communication. And of course bullying has become sort of showcased now in education. It's something that we talk about a lot in education, particularly at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, right? Not so much in college, but when children are younger, there's a lot of concern now about them being bullied. And I think part of this has to do with the spate of school shootings that have occurred over the past couple of decades, right? So we know that when kids get bullied, it results in negative outcomes. And indeed, I think this chart is really telling. So this chart shows us the likelihood of a student taking a weapon to school in the past 30 days based on risk factors, right? So if you haven't been bullied at all, there's less than a 5% chance that you've brought a gun or a knife or something similar to school in the past 30 days. If you've been bullied, that goes up to almost 9%. If you've been bullied and you've had your property damaged or stolen, 14%. If you're bullied and you get into a fight, it's almost 24%, right? So it goes on and on till we get up to bullied, threatened, or injured in a fight and miss school due to safety concerns. So if you got bullied, got into a fight, and you didn't go to school the next day because you were scared to, there's over a 50% chance that you've brought a gun to school with you in the past 30 days. That's a huge number, right? So bullying is understandably the focus of much attention in education today. Now, violence in interpersonal relationships is much more common, unfortunately, than we realize, right? We know that minor acts of violence, such as pushing and shoving, probably affect as many as half of all couples in the U.S. So the way that it's portrayed in the media, you might think that these kinds of relatively minor acts of violence are very rare, but they're not. Right? We think that they happen in at least half of all relationships. And we know that this kind of violence begins early. We know that 42% of sixth graders say that they've been victims of violence from their boyfriend or girlfriend, which is kind of amazing to me because when I was in sixth grade, I didn't have I wasn't even thinking about having a girlfriend, right? Now, with family violence, it's important to recognize that there are many different kinds, right? There's child abuse, spousal abuse. There could be abuse between siblings, so brothers and sisters picking on each other. Elder abuse, where people are picking on grandma or grandpa. Incest, so sexual abuse, right? And what we find is that violence begets violence. So in other words, if you've experienced violence, if your parents are violent towards you as you're growing up, it really increases the chances that you'll be violent with your children when you have them, right? Now, what's important to recognize is that this cycle of violence can be broken through communication. Your book says that some feel that the cycle can be broken through communication. I'll tell you, I think that more often than not, it can, right? Simply being aware of this pattern oftentimes helps people, prevents them from repeating, from doing the same thing to their kids, for example, that their parents have done to them. Now, it's important to recognize, we've talked about a lot of the bad things that come from interpersonal conflict, but there are positives. So managing conflict with sensitivity leads to positive evaluations of communication competence. So if you're able to, to unpack this, if you're able to manage conflict with sensitivity, then that means that people really think well of you, right? They like you. And dealing productively with conflict in romantic relationships promotes positive feelings and contributes to mutually held feelings of understanding. So if you're able to productively deal with your arguments and your disagreements in your romantic relationships, then it's going to lead to positive feelings and a better long-term relationship where both people feel like they understand one another. So all this relates to the idea of positive and negative interaction ratios. So a positive interaction ratio is one in which there are more positive things that are being said between people than negative ones, right? So to achieve a positive interaction ratio, you have more positive things to say than negative things to your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, what have you. With a negative interaction ratio, you achieve this when you say more negative things to each other than positive things. And the last element that I want to talk about in terms of these ratios is what's known as the magic ratio. Now, this right here is worth the price of the course, if you understand this. So the magic ratio maintains that you should say 5 good things to someone for every 1 bad thing that you say. And if you do this, you will have a successful relationship. Indeed, so when we studied newlyweds, we found that we could predict with 74% accuracy, right after people get married now, right after they get married, you could predict with 74% accuracy whether or not they would get divorced based on whether or not they maintain the magic ratio. So in couples where people said or communicated positively 5 times for every bad thing that they communicated, then it was likely that they were going to stay married. If they didn't do this, then they could call correctly 74% of the time that their marriage would end in failure right after the people got married. So again, if you want your relationship to last, you should say 5 good things to your spouse for every 1 bad thing that you say. All right, that's it for this short lecture. Next time we'll talk about different models and ways to explain conflict.